Okay, well, welcome to Theology on Tap. My name is Michael from STM Campus Ministry, and each year, from September 1st to October 4th, we celebrate the season of creation. And even though it's well past October 4th, this is still a very important thing that we want to talk about. And so today, our special guest is someone who has stories from all around the world. We can't wait to hear her stories. And so today, I would ask you to, join me in welcoming Lesya Sabada. Lesya, how are you doing today?
Oh, super. So nice to see you. And thank you so much for thinking about me and inviting me. I feel really kind of privileged. Thanks.
Oh, I'm so happy that you were able to join us. So we've been talking a lot about people's vocation stories, but we also really want to talk about not just the way God's calling you, but the way God's calling all of us to work on the environment. And so, but maybe we'll start with you and your story. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about how God has called you in your life and how you've responded.
Well, I think that's a very good question, and it was a good chance for me to try to articulate what I'm trying to do, because, we need a vision. Without a vision, we perish. And so I wanted to think about what my vision was right now. And I thought that I really, in my heart, in the depths of my soul, I want to educate a new generation of young people, or actually anyone that was listening, with the whole idea of peace building. So peace building is an activity that aims to resolve conflict in non-violent ways and to transform some of the cultural and structural systems that have generated conflict or destruction within our society. And it works on many levels. It works between humans, it works within the with our relationship with the environment and with the animal kingdom. So I think what I try to do is to provide people this understanding of peace building, and that it's very important in our modern society, because the society is such that it's strongly against some of the ideas that are being proposed, that I try to talk about in peace building. So the tools and the skills and the knowledge are very, very important, and is really in strong contrast to the society that we live in. So I'm hoping that the students in the classroom or in my family will be able to create an ethos in which peace building is really seen as something very important and relevant in people's lives. So these peace building efforts aim to look at our worldviews, look at our beliefs, our attitudes and our behaviors, so that we can transform the short and long-term dynamics between individuals and groups, or between a person's relationship with the environment or with the animal kingdom, and hopefully it will provide a more stable and peaceful coexistence. So it's peace building, making peace with all the various dimensions of life.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. That sounds so good. Now, have you always felt that you've throughout your life have been called to be a teacher and an educator?
I think so. I think so. I think it was something I was born with, and I always worked with the poor. So I remember living in Newfoundland and working with they were called the Inuits. They called them the indigenous populations there. They used to call them the Eskimos, that kind of language, which we don't use anymore. But that indigenous group I worked with, and saw at a very early age the poverty that they lived in, and the discrepancy between what I was brought up in. Not that I was brought up in a well-off world, but the family life was modest, but there was problems that we saw on the reserves. And then from there, I moved to Colombia, South America, and lived in the barrios there. So there people were actually living at a very low level of existence. They didn't have the medicines, they didn't have the education, the open sewage was all over the place. So we would go there and take children that were off the streets. And there with the children, we would try to bring them into Ciudad Don Bosco, which was where the Roman Catholic Church worked and had an institution right in the barrio, and tried to give the boys basic things like food, clothing, a clean bed, love. And so then we also had educational classes, and we learned about all sorts of systems of violence and non-violence. And I studied the genocide in Ukraine, for instance, when I was young and 18, became very aware and sensitized to the inequalities and the violence in the world. Mom and Dad also were refugees from World War II, right? So during World War II, Hitler would enter into Ukraine where Mom and Dad were living. They had to go through Ukraine to try to overcome Russia. And because all the young German men were forced to serve in the Nazi military, who was going to run the farms and who was going to run the country. So then what the Nazi machinery did is go into places like villages where my mom and dad lived and forced people to give up one child of the family. And then they were taken, like my mom was the one, was taken on the trains, just like the Jews were, to Germany, and was forced to work on the farms. Dad was one who was 19, and he tried to run away in the farms, run away into the countries, but he eventually got caught and was forced to work with the Nazis too. So initially Dad was working as support for the Nazis. So he would be driving the artillery, the machinery and everything like that, the guns. And then as time went on, he ended up in the camps. And when the Allies came, he was covering up the war crimes, that the killing that was all going on in these camps. So then eventually Mom and Dad ended up in the displaced persons camps. And then Mom was on the very first boat that landed to Canada with full of refugees. So I grew up in a family that was really traumatized by war and had suffered greatly. And then as a little girl, the refugees, the Ukrainian community was such as that they went and they supported each other because their families were behind the former Soviet Union. And so they became each other's brothers and sisters and support staff. So they were not support staff, but support. So often Mom and Dad had gatherings at their home with these types of refugees. And so they would tell stories about the war and the atrocities they had lived through. And I could see as a child that there was something very dysfunctional about them because many of them were alcoholics, many of them had troubles with depression and PTSD, all of that. So I was brought up in them, and I was always wondering why this had happened to me. And I said to myself, as a teenager, I would be questioning God when I'd be having my walks and long talks with him, why? And then it wasn't until later on that I understood that this really was a calling. So this calling for peace building was something that was nurtured out of a traumatic past of parents that had really gone on to suffer a great deal. And I knew it wasn't, I knew it was very, very serious. And so, yeah, that's kind of the story of how it all started. I didn't know if you knew that about me, hey?
No, this is fascinating stuff. This is great.
Okay, it's all true.
Yeah. They say, what was it? This is a true story, and some of it really happened.
No, it was really the story of moms and dads all happened to their lives, and what the Nazis did happened to millions of people.
Yeah.
So it is not something just particular to our family, but it was something that was happening all over in Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and So oftentimes we may become aware of the genocide of the Holocaust, but there was also this other side of World War II and life under the Soviet Union that we astonishingly do not know about what's happening. You know, our Canadian educational system isn't really much aware about that side of the world and the atrocities that had happened. So mom and dad came from not only, you know, dealing with the trauma of the World War II and the Nazis, but they lived under the oppression of the communist regime. So that was another huge burden that they had to live with.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm kind of interested in this peace building you've been drawn to and you've been called to. And it has a relationship with the earth and the environment. And I was just kind of wondering, what positive things have you seen happen in the church's work in the area of the environment?
Well, it's very easy for an Eastern Christian as I am to bring in the environment into the peace building, because in our iconography, for instance, whether it's the icon of the baptism of Christ, or whether it's the resurrection or Christmas icons, they always have a significant amount of icon that deals with the created order, the creation, the animals, and the kingdom of, you know, the trees and the rivers, the mountains. And so and everything like that, the whole created order was involved in the saving acts of Christ. So the resurrection, for instance, was not only the resurrection of the human being, it didn't focus so much on the human being, but it was the resurrection of the mountains and the rivers and the trees and the animals. Everything is resurrected in the end. So it was very natural for me to be involved with the environmental concerns. I think in 2007, when Jane Goodall came to Saskatoon and she spoke, I think that would be a real turning point in my life there. I think the love for the animals and the love for the nature was always in me. It was always nurtured by mom and dad, but I think it really came forward, it really burst open at that time. And I remember back then teaching courses in Western world religions, or whether it was religion and nonviolence, bringing in a non-anthropocentric view and trying to expand people's views of concern that they should have. So when I saw that the church came out with Laudato Si, the encyclical, in 2015, I was really, really quite excited to see that. However, it was something that was within the Eastern Christian church tradition. And so the season of creation is an annual celebration of prayer and action to protect God's creation. And it's celebrated by all Christians and leaders of various churches and around the world. And it started September 1st. And it ends, as you know, October the 4th, the feast of St. Francis. But September 1st is the beginning of the church year for the Eastern Christian churches. And it was proclaimed the World Day of Prayer for Creation, or Creation Day, by the Ecumenical Patriarch Demetrius, or from the Orthodox Church in 1989. And then it was all embraced by all the Christian European churches in 2001. And then the Roman Catholic Church, under the leadership of Pope Francis, it embraced it in 2015. But I think it's really important to let people understand that the Eastern Church really was leading in this area way before Laudato Si by the present Orthodox patriarchs that are based in Constantinople. So, but it's, you know, they're a small group compared to the Roman Catholics. So when the Roman Catholics get on board, I mean, it's really very good. So the positive things in the church is that Pope Francis was able to come out with this encyclical that was written to the entire human race. And I think that is very important. And I find that that's super, super important. But it's not only the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox that are doing something like that. If we take a look at the Anglican Church, for instance, I just attended, not just, but last year I attended at the Desmond and Leah Tutu annual peace lecture from South Africa. And there they would have Archbishop Tutu give his presentation on how we are damaging the climate. I mean, the planet Earth with climate change and loss of biodiversity. But he only had basically young youth activists from Africa who were giving presentations about what was happening on the continent of Africa. And it was fascinating because they're dealing a lot with poverty there and drought, and they are experiencing the effects of climate change at a much more deeper and it's spread out all over in Africa. So it was very interesting how a prominent leader in the church like Archbishop Desmond Tutu is really giving the youth a stage and a voice. And so I was really, really pleased. So those are some of the nice things that are happening within the church and in the various branches of Christianity.
So for an average Christian, for an average citizen even, what would you say is something that an average person could do to help this situation in terms of climate change and loss of biodiversity?
Well, I think I think people have to look in the mirror and just ask the very difficult questions and try to see the connections between their actions and the consequences. So whenever if I'm buying something, like a piece of clothing, is that piece of clothing that I'm buying harming or supporting a sweatshop in Bangladesh, for instance, right? Is it harming the environment? Is anything that I buy or eat, is it harming the animal kingdom? So I think that when we look at all our small actions, that we can try to understand where did that t-shirt come from, and that meat that I'm eating, did it come from a factory farm? Do I really need to eat this amount of meat, for instance? Because it's very, very important for us to understand that one of the ways in which we can stop the effects of climate change is to eat less meat. We don't need to eat it every day or 3 times a meal, even if we cut it down a little bit, but, we are cutting down the Amazon forest and these beautiful, rich biodiversity hotspots on the planet so that we can let the cows go in there and so that they can graze, and then so that the Argentinians, for instance, can have their steak or whatever it is, right? Or that the soy could be grown and be shipped to China. So what an individual can do is to just understand that they are important and that they have a role to play, and that everything that they do, every decision they make matters, and if the decision can be either positive or negative, and so they have to think through carefully. And I think, people have not in the past been empowered in understanding that the individual matters, but we have a role to play, and we do have a lot of power in how we're going to spend our money, and we have power in the kind of politicians we are going to come in and serve, and whether these politicians have a platform that's going to bring down the greenhouse emissions or not, and things like that. So I think it's really important, and to understand that to be aware that if you have millions of people doing the same thing, that it does make an impact. Surely, if I just stop eating meat or don't have whatever for supper, it's not going to make much of an impact. But I have to realize and have the big picture that many people are striving to do this, and it does have an impact on the environment. The reverse is true. If I keep on insisting that I have to eat meat, or keep on insisting that I need to buy that new dress or whatever, that it is going to make an impact. So Right, we have to understand the consequences of our actions, that how we live and do things is very important, and really to make a distinction between our wants and our needs.
Oh yeah, that's so important.
Yeah,
That's
our
right.
wants and our needs. So I'm driving here, I'm driving in the neighborhood, and people now are getting ready for Halloween, and these big plastic, you know, decorations are coming up, and the question that we need to ask is this really needed, and is this necessary in the time that we live in, the 21st century, given the crisis that we are having in the environment? I don't want to be judgmental or anything, but I just want to ask people these questions. Is this really needed? Have you kind of thought it through? And just because you may have the money to do it doesn't necessarily mean it's really the best choice.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's really important that we all look in the mirror, like you said, and ask these important questions. Now, I know that when we work for justice and we educate for justice, it can be very challenging, and so we really need to make sure that we are sustained. So I was kind of wondering, what sustains you? Who supports you, and in your vocation, and what are the good things that you are really benefiting from? What are the things that give you joy in this life?
Oh, there's so much. I just I'm really content. I'm at this age and stage in my life. I'm really content, and I'm really happy. I feel that I have so many gifts. Like, I'm healthy. The family's good. No, we're not divided. Right now, COVID, what's happening is that a lot of division is happening within families and societies and everything. So I feel really good. And because I don't have those kind of burdens, I can be actively engaged in life. I have such a great joy with some of my students. This year, coming back to teaching is really different because, first of all, it has been taken away from us. So those who come to the class really want to be there. And I find them a lot more engaged. And I used to have, 10 or 15% on attendance and participation. Well, I didn't have anything like that in the syllabus at all. Because it wouldn't be fair to the students if they had to be away, if they were sick, or COVID, whatever, right? So I said, I'm not going to do that. And we're just going to go and see who comes. Well, the attendance rate has been really, really high, and particularly in this Introduction to Peace Studies and Western World Religions. And, those students, some of them are so amazing. I made the students in the Introduction to Peace course do some presentations. And I can't believe how intelligent they are. I can't believe how they are able to articulate, and some of them talk about really difficult things. So I had this one student who came from the history of the residential school system. His parents did, and he told his life story and how he went through the terrible trauma of that, and then how he's come through it so beautifully, and is really been one of the Indigenous members of our of the population that is a success story and is a real inspiration. And it's just so beautiful to hear a student to come up, tell them their stories. I'm an addict, or I was an alcoholic. I've been dry or sober for 9 years, and sets out these YouTubes that sober is sexy, and he has a following. I think I just, I'm really, really moved, and how he understood that to make peace out in the environment, you had to first make peace with yourself and, fight your demons and everything like that. There's been some real powerful moments in that class. And so as far as my career goes, the teaching is more exciting than ever. I've been busy writing. I'm happy I'm very happy with Bishop Brian Beda, also who encourages and supports the work that I do from the Eparchy in terms of letting Laudato Si be known to different branches of Christianity, even those who are not Christian. And I bring always in the Eastern Christian point of view. So the other thing that I do that sustains me is, I like to read, and I go into the works of people like scientists like Sylvia Earle, who's a woman that studies the oceans, or Jane Goodall, or one of my favorites is Edward Wilson, who's the Darwin of the 20th century. I get sustained by that. And then, but probably mostly is my grandkids. They bring so much joy. They really do. And then that's why I work hard, because in one way they're giving me a lot of joy. The other way, the other part of it is that I worry about their futures in terms of what kind of planet that we're leaving behind them. So so I'm just surrounded by all this support, and trees, a walk, a hike, all of those things. I'm bombarded with support.
Oh, that is wonderful.
I really am bombarded. But you have to have the eyes to see. But yeah, so it's all good.
Excellent.
And okay, go on.
No, go ahead. You were going to say something?
I was going to say that we really live in a great time now. It's a convergence of a lot of crises. Like we have, when we had our peace lecture, the speakers, the senators spoke about, there's the nuclear bombs, and then there's the climate change, and there's lots of biodiversity. There's, the pandemic happening. But he said, along with other people that have said the same idea that Sylvia Earle, I first heard the idea, was that we live in really exciting times, because although there's all these crises, there's an awful lot of opportunity. So Sylvia Earle will say, 50 years ago, we did not know what we were doing to the planet. We did not know what we were doing to the oceans. We did not know all the pollution that was happening, right? But she says, but now we do know. So now we can do something about it. So we understand the problems. And so now we also understand what we can do to move ahead. And before that understanding, 50 years ago, people did not have it. So if there was a time to be born, I think it's really now, and to try to move and act in healing whatever a relationship it is with the human being, or with the Mother Earth, or with the animal kingdom.
That is excellent. It's so great to hear such a positive message, and to hear how we can move and act in a positive way, even though some of these crises might sort of make us feel a little bit low. There's always
like an existential crisis.
Well, it's so great to have all these crises, so we can have all these opportunities.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time today, because this has been a great conversation, and I really think you've given our viewers lots to think about and lots to consider in moving forward. So I really want to thank you for your time today, Lesya. Thanks for being with us.
Okay, it was great. I hope to see you again as I'm walking by the hallway, knocking on your door. And hi, Mike. Yeah, okay.
That sounds great. Okay.
Okay,
We'll
we'll
see you
see you.
again.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.